Hello everyone. In November 2018, the Australian Electric Vehicle Association Queensland Division, with the support of government and private sector sponsors, held the electric vehicle exhibition at the Brisbane Convention Centre. An event like this is fantastic as it raises awareness of many different aspects around electric vehicles by providing access to industry experts who share their knowledge and answer the audience's questions. This video is only one part of the conference that went over 2 days, so if you're enjoying it, consider checking out some of the other excellent presentations. If you'd like to attend one of the monthly get-togethers to learn more about electric vehicles, the Queensland meeting is held on the third Wednesday night of each month at the Albion Peace Centre, 102 McDonald Road in Windsor, with a 7:30 start time. And don't forget to check out the AEVA's website, which is linked in the description below. Enjoy the video and I'll see you on the next one.
Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, as Sally alluded to, is Dr. Michael Kane. He's the Director of Innovation and Economic Strategies at the Economic Development Department of Queensland. Michael's role is to support EDQ's innovative planning and development initiatives relating to future transport, smart cities, sustainable energy and water, housing and the knowledge economy. Working with Queensland state agencies and local government, Michael's team has developed EV infrastructure planning expertise and guidelines. Michael's worked with EDQ and Urban Land Development Authority since 2009 in sustainability, innovation and strategy advisory roles. Before this, he was an advisor for the Minister for Planning and Infrastructure in Western Australia on land development, transport and strategic planning. No better qualified person in the country to speak. Please welcome Dr. Michael Kane.
Thank you. Just a little bit of context about Economic Development Queensland. We're a commercial business unit of the Department of State Development, Manufacturing, Infrastructure and Planning, and effectively we undertake land development for the state, we undertake planning for the state, and we, in particular areas and particular specified zones, and effectively we were able to do demonstration and delivery of outcomes in innovation. So the question is, why plan for EV infrastructure? The key thing here is we're thinking ahead. So Sally's outlined the policy context. The policy context is not about delivering for the next 1 to 2 years. It's really about the next 10 to 15, 20 years. It's about a transformation. And what we can see from the evidence worldwide is that EVs will become the dominant form of land transport within a decade or so. So we know that this is happening reasonably quickly. And from a planning and development perspective, where we're planning for 20 or 30 years, we need to get onto this. So the planning system and the development industry needs to really get ahead of the game. And what we do know from the US is that key segments can go electric very quickly. The Tesla Model 3, everybody probably knows this, is blowing away the competition in the small and mid-sized luxury car market in the US. That market is about 65,000 vehicles a year in Australia. And we heard in the last week that Canada is now at 8% of new sales of EVs, mainly driven by the Model 3. So as new vehicles come to the market, they can make a big difference quickly. So we need to get ahead of the game in terms of charging infrastructure. So Sally set out the future as electric. There's a key component there on the charging infrastructure, and EDQ's role is to assist effectively with the planning of that and to make sure we embed it across the whole of the planning and development system. So the key there is the EV Super Highway, but we're also doing work in destination EV charging strategies, and we've actually developed an EV infrastructure planning note and embedding EV infrastructure into the planning and development system. And I'll talk a bit more about that and how we're doing that. So one of the key things in looking at EV planning infrastructure is that it's not just about transport, it's just not about electricity. There's a whole range of things we have to consider. A key one of them is actually user parking and driver patterns. We need to understand how that works. And we also, from a developer's perspective and a local government planning perspective, need to understand what your destination parking strategy is then to enable the most appropriate type of EV charging. And we also need to understand destination consumer spend patterns, because the way people spend money in their parking is really an opportunity to understand how we do destination EV charging. And when we're looking at EV charging, we're really starting now to focus on these new vehicles coming in. Reality is, within 10 years, every Australian will be able to will have a choice of an EV which will meet 95% of their daily transport need and their yearly transport need. So we can have an abundance of EV charging coming into Queensland, and so we need to ensure that our planning and development system is ready for that task. Now, the electricity grid issues have been floated up from time to time. I just want to give you a bit of the research we've done. This is actually a neighbourhood from Western Australia, and anyone in the electricity system will be familiar with the electricity duck curve. Each of those lines represents a month of the year. The blue is the demand, so we have, and this duck curve is the same in America, California, Queensland, WA, New South Wales. So we have a morning peak. The gold, green and red is the solar PV generation in the middle of the day, and then we have this high duck curve head at the end of the day. Now, the higher that duck curve is, the more electricity costs, because that's what drives the infrastructure costs. So we've got a bit of it doesn't quite work out the way it really should. And this is some information from Western Australia. I actually spoke in Western Australia earlier this year, so I used their data, and their data was excellent. TMR's got some excellent data, but I thought I'd stick at a national perspective. This is road data on particular roads. What's interesting here is the ones in the top right are really commercial, industrial, major roads. The others are our domestic roads. And what we see is that the road pattern also shows a peak demand roughly the same time as the energy demand. Now, so you think about this, is we have peak demand in the energy system, and we have peak demand in car demand, and they align. So there's an opportunity here, and that is that we need to create, in terms of enabling the best and to really bring down the price of electricity. The electric vehicle can actually help us bring down the price of electricity, is by focusing then on when is the best time to actually charge a vehicle. So overnight we have capacity in the electricity grid, and we know that we have the maximum generation of wind, renewable wind, and we also have capacity in the middle of the day to generate solar, and we have cars not being used generally during the middle of the day. So what we have is this, what I refer to is the best charging times with the duck curve is the duck's eggs. And it's really going to a top-up model, not a fill-up model. And that's because that will provide, those two opportunities provide the best chance for renewables, the best chance for the lowest cost charging, and the least impact on the electricity grid. And it means that this is the AC charging times, and it is about the times when cars are not being heavily used. And just on that point, we know that cars generally are parked for 95% of the time. So 95% of the time, cars have opportunity to charge on AC. Now, what we're doing in EDQ is we're actually developing planning guides, and we're actually implementing these planning guides. So we have the Australia's first electric vehicle charging infrastructure practice note for local government developers, and that's now a part of our EDQ statutory system. It's not a part of the wider state system, but it is a part of EDQ's planning system. And give you an example how it has started to make an impact. Just north of Brisbane, there's an area of the city which is going through a regeneration, which is Bowen Hills Priority Development Area, which is under EDQ planning. We've actually now got a new development scheme or town planning scheme out for community consultation, and in that is requirements on new buildings to have EV charging. Now, it's really about getting ready for EV charging. It's still some baby steps, but again, this is the way we can take steps to get this ubiquitous through the planning system. It won't happen overnight, but through these mechanisms, we can help educate people, local governments and developers to get moving. And why have planning charging guidelines? I'm not going to dob in these locations, but we have some examples. This one from PlugShare, where a Tesla driver couldn't actually get his car close enough to charge unless he drove onto the pavement. obviously not a well-designed, and that was actually a 50 DC charger. And another council officer, where the council, this is a regional council, went out and put in some charging, but they basically didn't put it, it was very poorly designed. They recognised the need to do it differently and to follow our planning guideline. But and I don't want to be too critical of local government here, because at least they get out and do things. And what's interesting, I think, across Australia is that, that we could argue the federal government hasn't done enough. Queensland's the only state to really get moving. The ACT's got moving, but local government have been doing this for at least 10 years, and I want to recognise Brisbane City Council, who are one of the sponsors, because they've put in charging back in 2012 in King George Square. So local government are the leaders, I think, and it should be recognised for this in terms of EV infrastructure. So, and some principles behind our practice note, and that is the best is a top-up system, not a fill-up system. It's better orientated to relying mostly on AC charging, with DC charging happening when you need to do long trips. And what our planning guide's done is create a set of levels and categories, and really to enable the creation of an ecosystem of EV infrastructure charging across urban and regional development. And we've focused on type 2 because that's best suited to Australia in terms of being able to maximise the fact that our electrical infrastructure has three-phase power. And I was just told by TMR on my way up that Hyundai have told the Premier of Queensland that they chose to bring type 2 into Australia because of the policy work done by TMR and the Queensland government to bed that down into the EV Super Highway. So Queensland's lead has really influenced the manufacturers, and we know BMW have also gone to type 2. So that leadership from the Queensland government is making a difference nationally. And of course, we get into that detail in our guide of the charging site and hardware layout. And so this is what the ecosystem charging looks like. We know that there's a ubiquitous number of EV charging opportunities. Well, they're often very slow, but those 3 kilowatt and 7 kilowatt opportunities can be very cheap to charge a car. And the ultra-fast are really there, and the DC to create that convenience and opportunity for long-distance travel. But having that whole ecosystem really delivers the best way of delivering EV infrastructure, charging infrastructure. And what we do know is that most charging is actually done at home and workplace in, say, the US and at destination, and only around 5% is done interregionally. So that workplace and home and probably destination is mostly going to be AC charging. So every bit of EV charging infrastructure plays a part, and it's all important. And our practice note really sets out at the different levels from ultra-fast to occasional, the sort of factors that you need to consider when you're doing your EV charging infrastructure. So it really starts to inform people, local governments and developers, what they need to be thinking about. And we've started drafting DA texts, so engagement with local government. So when we do commercial buildings or multi-residential buildings, what are the requirements to effectively get buildings prepared so they're future-proof? So we're getting down to that level of detail in the planning system and engaging with local governments in Queensland. And I just want to give another example here of the EV Super Highway in terms of the planning. And this I think the leadership in Queensland is, that TMR led this and got EDQ to help and got Energy Queensland in, and we had a whole of government approach, and we worked with local government as well. So it was really a great team example where government can deliver great outcomes. This is the transmission system of Ergon Energy and the transformers which have capacity for EV charging. And working with Bundaberg Regional Council, who are fantastic in this, we started looking at from the planning system, where was the best place to put the superhighway charger? And we had 6 locations we considered. We ended up at a 7th, but it was that that detailed provision of information from council and from Ergon Energy that delivered the most effective, cost-effective solution. So our EV superhighway was very cost-effective because of the amount of consultation and planning and background information that was provided. And so we Obviously, we'll see and be helping to plan the key transport corridors for ultra-fast charging. So again, it is the whole system, and the ultra-fast charging is going to be important for uptake, and it is going to be important to enable people to go away on holiday and weekends and travel around Australia and travel between cities, and it will be important for commercial vehicle use. So just to finish, the key thing is we've got to get planning now. We've got to get this built in, this ecosystem built into our urban frame, our urban fabric, into our buildings. We've got to focus on this top-up culture, and really most of the charging needs to be around slow and low-cost AC charging. We know the DC charging is very important, and that needs to be put in the focus on key transport corridors. And as I said, this is a holistic approach that needs to be applied. It's about transport, it's about electricity networks, it's about economic development, it's about tourism. You need to think holistically. And in destination charging, you really have to understand your parking and your consumer spend. If you understand those two things, you'll get a really good outcome. So thank you.
That was fantastic, Dr. Kane. And it's just nice that you've come from Western Australia to Queensland to share the wisdom and the facts. It's nice because, as Sally mentioned, policy should be based on facts. Ladies and gentlemen, as an independent senator representing South Australia, Tim Storer is adamant about bringing a responsible and evidence-based approach to decision-making underpinned by 4 benchmarks: integrity, fairness, prosperity and sustainability. Tim studied economics and environmental studies at the University of Adelaide and graduated top of his class with an MBA at the Australian National University. He feels we must not let the electric vehicle revolution pass us by. As the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Electric Vehicles, Tim is looking forward to investigating ways in which Australia can play a leading role. Energy efficiency is also a key priority, where even small improvements have the potential to dramatically improve the everyday lives of those who are struggling. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Tim Storer.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the organisers, AEVA, for the opportunity to come and speak to you all here in a very full room, and it's a great pleasure to be here. It's good to be back in Brisbane. As some of you know, we had a public hearing here on as part of the Senate Select Committee on Electric Vehicles last month, and that went quite well. We had a number of witnesses and some fantastic information shared, and we also had a site visit to Tritium as well. So I was able to take a number of the other senators to touch and feel, to a degree, more the infrastructure that is being put in place and see more of the opportunities, particularly around business and the like, that is coming from this revolution. So today I hope to be able to explain to you some of what this committee that I set up and lucky to be chairing has done over the last several months, why I pushed to establish it, what we've learnt so far, and what we hope to get out of it. When I was able to enter the Senate in March due to one of the citizenship situations, which you can certainly go and have a look at the history, but a great honour it is to be a senator for South Australia and to weigh up issues and legislation on behalf of that state, but also, of course, for all of us here. And when very early on in my meetings in March, I had a meeting with the Electric Vehicle Council and some other stakeholders, and I'd certainly been thinking about the electric vehicle industry before that and the situation, but it really came very much more clearer to me, many of those things. So I recognise that the EV revolution is coming, whether some like it or not. I know we all do like it here, but that it's very clear that many other OECD countries, almost all, are moving quickly to position themselves so that they can maximise the benefits, minimise the associated risks. And I also realised that what was happening at the federal level to prepare what looks set to be the greatest disruption to our transport system since the advent of the ICE didn't have enough coordinated initiatives, and so I thought, right, I'll try and do something about this. So in May I sought to have support of the parliamentary colleagues to set up this Senate select committee into electric vehicles, and around 4 key terms of references, they being the economic, environmental, social benefits from electric vehicles, widespread electric vehicles, the opportunities in manufacturing, supply chain activities, measures that we could do to support the acceleration of electric vehicle uptake, measures for the manufacturing supply chain and other opportunities, and how federal, state and local governments could work better together to support acceleration of uptake and manufacturing and supply chain activities. So established in June, and we started receiving submissions and had hearings from August, and we had 134 submissions from a wide range of stakeholders, be they manufacturers, state and federal government departments, councils, academics, industry groups, unions and think tanks, and we held public hearings in Adelaide, Melbourne, Canberra twice, Brisbane, and we've had 5 site visits, as well as the one to visit here, we had here, and heard from 85 witnesses. So what we've learnt, and the initial findings on the topic, are that really the EV revolution is certainly on our doorstep. Of course, we all know the Bloomberg stats of the anticipation of 55% of all new car sales globally by 2040, and we've just heard that Norway is already at 39%, so that certainly seems reasonable in terms of that time frame, and with a cost reduction to be the equivalence of petrol and diesel cars in the medium-sized vehicle category by 2025 in markets like the US and EU and China. So here we anticipate, from many statistics given, that EV uptake will grow rapidly from 2025 to 2035, reaching 60% of all new passenger vehicle sales by 2040, because we do, in Australia, once we get going, become usually early adopters. So the investment plans of the car manufacturers globally, as many of you know, provide the most compelling evidence of this transition. Volkswagen recently announced they'll invest $84 billion to bring 300 EV models onto the market by 2030. And I saw an article in Driven, the website focused on in electric vehicles, that they've already moved to 200 or so models already. But we know that in Australia the uptake of electric vehicles is very poor compared to other countries, and we know that 5 million Norwegians buy more EVs in a week than 25 million Australians buy in a year. And in New Zealand, there's 2,000 more EVs on the road than we have, even though they have a population smaller than Sydney. 14 countries have already announced plans to phase out the sale of diesel and petrol cars, including UK, Germany, France and China. And very importantly, the lion's share of the EV investment announced to date is being made in developed countries, Germany and US leading the charge. So this is not a new developing country manufacturing story only. Not that sort of story, it's one of the developed countries. So with regards to the terms, what we've learned regarding economic, environmental, social benefits is that we learnt about the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, reduced transport costs, oil dependency, local air quality and public health, electric grid utilisation and stability, resilience to natural disasters, and the opportunities in new jobs and industries. And that there was also some risks in terms of that perhaps the EVs might account for 11% of Australia's total energy demand in 2040, and we've seen the duck curve and the analysis given by Dr. Kane already with regards to thinking of that around those things. Then there was also the focus on the decline in fuel tax excise, which raised questions on how our road spending going forward, and I can hear a few murmurs in the room about that issue, which is quite interesting. Opportunities in manufacturing, supply and value chain. We heard from companies like EV Electric, who I know have a stand here with regards to their retrofitting of commercial delivery vehicles with batteries and electric motors, and they recently announced expansion of facilities in the Latrobe Valley. We visited them in Dandenong as part of the hearings, and Brisbane-based Tritium here, who are building EV chargers for export around the world and have several hundred employees. We heard from a number of startups that are interested in building EVs here and using natural resources, manufacturing capabilities, even proximity to Asia in terms of opportunities. We heard from mining companies very interested in the lithium and other metals, cobalt, nickel, other minerals, go into EV batteries and what they would like to do in terms of expanding their activities and possibly into the processing, because being a missing part of the puzzle in terms of being able to fully have this whole supply chain aspect in Australia. We heard that the federal government could be doing more, a lot more. We don't have a target, an overarching strategy or coordination, and there's very little to support consumers, manufacturers, and the rollout of necessary infrastructure. Alongside all of the hearings and the submissions, I kind of wanted to note also many of the interesting things that are going on, announcements that are being made even in the last month or so. And they're in the electric vehicle space, but also into the autonomous vehicle area as well. Infrastructure Victoria have released a report in October, advice on an automated and zero emissions infrastructure with 17 recommendations against the context of 7 possible scenarios. So they're doing a lot of planning in that regard. The Australian government has announced the establishment of a Office of Future Transport Technologies, which is very automated vehicles focused with regards to safety and productivity benefits. Unfortunately, the inquiry into road user charging was effectively shelved, but that the department, that's announced by the Deputy Prime Minister in October, but that the Department of Transport is going to focus on this area of road user charging for heavy vehicle sector firstly, and then to light vehicles, which is not a positive situation in terms of this forum. They've had the Ministerial Forum on Vehicle Emissions meeting since late 2015, several years. We still really would like to see a lot more official findings and output from that with regards to electric vehicles and opportunities. But other positive initiatives that we've heard, like for example, is the $15 million investment into the ultra-rapid charging station network that ChargeFox are involved in, number of parties like all of the Australian mobility clubs, NRMA, RACV, RACQ, RAC, RAA and RACT, Wilson Transformers, Australian Renewable Energy Agency and the Victorian Government. So this will be the network of ultra-fast chargers from Brisbane around to Adelaide of 18 locations, and then 3 in Perth as well. So there's some other things that are going on which we're recognising. But I think in terms of the measures and actions that the committee has been tasked to investigate in terms of uptake of EV acceleration and manufacturing, supply chain attraction, and how the governments can work better. Certainly the hearings all noted the main barriers to electric vehicle uptake in terms of price, model availability, range anxiety and consumer awareness. So without promising or declaring really what has been formalised in terms of the report, which will be due to release in December, 4th of December, and other recommendations, I certainly hope that a focus of it will be certainly in terms of firstly a development of an Australian national policy to support the transition to electric vehicles. We know that the the New Zealand government's electric vehicle program, with its target of 64,000 EVs by 2021, and been many announcements since May 2016 in terms of tax exemptions until EVs reach 2% of fleet, government fleet purchasing, grant funds, and funding for consumers, has had a significant impact and driven that statistic of 2,000 more EVs than Australia. And I thought it was very important the UK Road to Zero strategy, which they announced the UK government this year. And this is, of course, a Conservative government, but a significant target of 50 to 70% by 2030 and 100% of electric vehicles by 2040. Government fleet target of 25% by 2022 and 100% by 2030, and that would have, of course, the implications, as Sally talked about, in terms of vehicles that will come out into the marketplace. And they're providing financial incentives for cars, taxis and vans, and grant funding for R&D and charging infrastructure. So I certainly hope that the report coming out will have a key push in that area in terms of an Australian national policy statement, because I think it's sadly lacking to date. Secondly, a development of an intergovernmental task force on electric vehicles, and I'm very interested in Sally speaking about the minister here and the meetings that are possibly happening, because it seems very clear that that's required for provision of facilitation of across levels of government, management of the risks, the discussion of standards, which I know is a key passion of a number of the people that have participated in the hearings, and coordination with references made to the COAG, Transport and Infrastructure Council. Thirdly, we heard a lot about charging infrastructure, discussion of the Queensland Government's EV strategy and electric super highway, the ACT Government's transition to zero emissions vehicle action plan, where they're doing things like not just charging stations but requiring all new multi-unit and mixed-use developments to install vehicle charging infrastructure, and charging stations within the ACT and then up towards Sydney and coastal areas as well. New South Wales have relaxed their planning laws regarding charging infrastructure, so easier to put them in place, and we know about the NRMA's initiative in terms of 40 chargers across New South Wales. Victoria are funding ultra rapid charging stations, and then we have all of the councils, and particularly from my perspective, the City of Adelaide in South Australia was an early mover in terms of provision of charging stations within its council area, and I know many other councils are very highly proactive in that as well. So I think we need a comprehensive plan with industry and government regarding the rollout of the national public charging network, and there is always the issue of support for charging infrastructures in areas which there is not so much a business case, but where infrastructure could serve as a public good, and that's shown in terms of expansion into the more regional rural areas if we do so. So I think a call for the building code to be changed for new units and detached dwellings across all states to provide for infrastructure. And we heard a lot of discussion about the idea of the Type 2 charging standard as Australia's national charging standards, with the DC charging moving to CCS-2 standard. The hearing heard a lot about the discussion of electricity infrastructure, and thinking of the electric vehicles as what they call DER, distributed energy resources, and really being able to map out where all these electric vehicles are. This is discussion by the Australian Energy Market Operator, AEMO, and so therefore to have a strategy around those distributed energy resources in terms of charging or provision of electricity into the grid from them, and they're relating to that an overall strategy of electricity network infrastructure upgrades and construction against forecast demand. So there is thinking going on by AEMO and other electricity related entities in Australia regarding electric vehicles. Fourthly, I think we heard a lot and would be looking for measures regarding commencement and coordinating of EV fleet purchases. The ACT government has mandated 50% of zero emissions vehicles by 2019-20 and 100% by 2021. We heard of Queensland government's initiatives in terms of fleets. and I think there's need for federal government targets and mandates to be pushed in terms of their vehicles, and to work with COAG in terms of the state and territory mandated targets. Fifthly, there's a lot of discussion, and I would be seeking some serious initiatives in terms of the report regarding purchasing incentives, and really looking to align consumer purchasing incentives in terms of the luxury car tax, the fringe benefits tax, vehicle registration fees, stamp duties, import duties, GST, and the user-based road use charge, because price is a very seriously considerable aspect to the non-acceleration of EV uptake in Australia. Then there's also, would look to make some statements regarding behavioural incentives, be they toll discounts or use of bus transit lanes and free charging. Consumer education campaign is very much needed as well, and assistance in terms of what the states are doing, but in this area, and further federal consumer education campaign like that. There'll be certainly, I think, the importation of second-hand EV policy would have to be certainly looked at, and I know even in terms of the Road Vehicle Standards Bill 2018, which is going to be discussed next week in the Senate, that I may well look to have amendments in terms of battery electric vehicles, plug-ins, in terms of importation, but there's a lot of varying viewpoints regarding that aspect. And then there's a lot of focus in terms of aligning industry for manufacturing, supply and value chain activities. We really need an overall industry plan. We need new grant programs in R&D for battery-related mining or motor componentry, wider activities. Discussion of the repurposing of the automotive transformation scheme to be towards the ease of use of manufacturing in electric vehicles, and further empowerment of all of these funding agencies such as ARENA, and then the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, CEFC as well. So those were some of the ideas which I hope to come out of in the report, which is being put together with recommendations by the 4th of December by Secretariat, working very hard in the Senate. I hope that it will have a report with concrete recommendations of consensus that will help the government to get more on the front foot, proactively plan for this coming transition. I've had meetings with the other coalition, ALP, Greens senators on the committee. We've identified a number of constructive areas in which I'm confident we can reach convergence, and I hope that the report and coming out of the committee will be a new, stronger initiative that the federal government can take up, and which can make 2019 and the years following a better, in terms of this fantastic opportunity we have in Australia, which we need to get on board and move forward far more quickly with. So thank you very much for the opportunity.